So up until now, I've always based my videos on everything which I observe in the financial markets, guys. And the reason I do this is because that's sort of where my expertise lies and is one of the most powerful tools that the bank gangsters have used to enslave humanity. So as I stated in my previous video, everything I've observed was 95 even to 100% of what I expect to be in place as that safety net, which will help you to support humanity once this criminal financial system collapses. And you realize, of course, that the petrodollar has to collapse, all the financial markets. So we're talking about all the Ponzi schemes. We're talking about the bond market. We're talking about the so-called stock exchange. All of those financial markets, all of those criminal financial markets, which are nothing but Ponzi schemes and filled with fraud, all of those systems have to collapse. And in order to pick up the slack, guys, because remember, it's going to be a very traumatic time. I mean, the way we've been programmed, we programmed with fear. So people are going to be very afraid when things like the stock exchange start to collapse, the bond market starts to collapse publicly. I'm talking about, because guys, for all intents and purposes, those markets have collapsed already. But just because it's not in the mainstream media, most people are blissfully unaware of the fact and are just carrying on with their lives, not realizing that these major events have actually occurred. But when it does become public, guys, because, like, for example, let's look at silver. So what they've done is the COMEX in the UK holds about 1 billion ounces of silver just to stabilize the silver price. So, you don't have these massive fluctuations in silver because of changes in demand and supply, etc. That specific billion ounces of silver has been consumed at an unbelievable rate. There is virtually no more silver available from that source to fill demand. So very, very soon, guys, although the silver price has remained low, it's been artificially kept low because they've been using that billion ounces. But once that billion ounces runs out, there's nothing more they can do. So despite their best attempts in the financial markets to prop up the bond market by buying back, unprecedented, where the central banks around the world were actually buying back the bonds or buying back their own debt. That's completely unprecedented, guys. It can only go to a point where all central banks around the world are now bankrupt. Think about it. How in the old system, if you think about the old system where the central banks, all they did was print money out of thin air, they could never be bankrupt. So the fact that the Australian central bank is billions of dollars in the red is proof that the white hats, the light, the good guys are doing everything possible to allow these guys to destroy themselves. So these Ponzi schemes, these fraudulent schemes, eventually, you cannot have a market that just keeps going up. It's absolutely impossible. So what these criminals generally do is when the market gets to a point where it's going to be a massive collapse, they make something massive happen, like the 2008 financial crisis or the 2020 COVID crisis, where they could again print copious amounts of money. Guys, I don't know if you're aware of it, but in 2020 they printed the equivalent of 30 years worth of money to so-called support the people through the COVID process. But what they were actually doing was they had actually run out of money. So they were, for all intents and purposes, the entire world was bankrupt. They'd used up all of the gold that was loaned to them by the White Dragons in 2008. They gave them $23 trillion worth of gold to keep the world economy turning. Well, that ran out, and like these people do, and they always make some kind of crisis. They create a crisis and then they print copious amounts of money, which again, what does that do? It makes us believe that we've recovered, but what we've actually done is, or should I rather say, what they've actually done is by printing these ridiculous sums of money, what they've done is effectively caused massive inflation. So indirectly, they've once again stolen more of the real wealth from humanity. But the great news is, guys, as I said, I've looked around these financial markets, and 95 to, I'll go as high as 100% of what I expect to be in place as that safety net to support humanity once this current criminal financial system completely collapses, guys, it's already in place. So this has really frustrated me because, maybe I was taking a bit of a one-sided view. I obviously looked at things from what I expect militarily, what I'd expect in other arenas. And I was getting very frustrated because I felt, man, this is just ridiculous. There's children starving out there at the moment. Why aren't we making things move a little bit quicker? So basically what I did was I said, okay, so I'm going to take another look. I want to possibly spend, and that's why I've taken so long to make this next video, was I wanted to put forward a more comprehensive look at what's going on in the market, and also, or should I rather say in our environment, to get a real deep understanding of what is delaying things. Why are the good guys not pulling the trigger? Why are we allowing our children to starve? Why are we allowing people to die? There's got to be that point. And in fact, I was actually chatting to Jen this morning, and I said, it just seems so ridiculous. At some point, yeah, of course, we don't want to scare people, and we don't want to wake them up with a massive fright that's going to cause people to commit suicide and do all sorts of ugly things to themselves. But at some point, guys, where do you draw the line where you say, when do we scare these people to stop children dying, to stop children suffering, etc.? And that is really where my frustration's being. So that's why I went and sort of in the interest of understanding the entire picture and to see what was I missing. I really took a deep dive into the following areas because I felt that these areas were the places where I might have been missing things. So I obviously, first of all, I took another really deep dive into the financial markets to see what was missing. And I'll go into a little bit more depth. I did find a couple of other things, but like I said, guys, everything that I would expect to be in place as a safety net to pick up the slack, I guess you would call it, when everything does collapse, is in place. And in fact, I proved that even more so. Next thing I looked at was, what possible mass extinction events could these bank gangsters be threatening, which may be delaying things? Guys, these are things like nuclear threats, things like other biological threats. And when we look around our environment, we look at these new so-called medical lockdown that we could be going into, but I'll go into more detail in a second about that. And next thing that I looked at, the third thing I looked at, is militarily. So what needs to happen militarily around the world, guys, before these things can be made public? Because I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but we are certainly involved in what I would refer to as a trans-dimensional war, where we're engaged on all fronts. So yes, of course, there's a kinetic element, and there always is a kinetic element, and I guess those kinetic elements are going on in the Ukraine, and if you go and do some digging and you use those non-Google search engines of mine, you'll be shocked to find out the depravity and the war that's been raging 10 kilometers or 33,000 feet below our feet, where these monsters have built what they call DUMBs, or deep underground military bases. So there's certainly that kinetic element. And the other two areas that I see, and I hadn't even considered these until I started doing this deep dive, is there's two other elements in the world that I see, and possibly a third one. And those two elements that need to be dealt with, the first one I came across was Syria. So there's some really, really dark, ugly stuff being done by these bank gangsters in Syria. And Turkey, I believe, is going to engage, and they're going to act in the interest of humanity with the backing of Russia. Russia's always been backing Syria, but I believe that Turkey is actually going to step forward, and they're actually going to use their military to go into Syria and actually clean out the deep state. So Syria certainly has to be cleaned up. Ukraine, guys, it's a very, very ugly situation going on in Ukraine, and I'm sure you guys are aware that Russia's liberating the Ukraine. They're certainly not the aggressors, but they've had massive backing from all over the world. It's been massive financial backing. That financial backing has turned into money which they've used to pay for. So basically what that money has done is it's allowed them to finance and pay for a massive amount of mercenaries to come and actually fight in Ukraine. So that's delayed things quite dramatically, but Russia's kind of had enough. Russia's really putting the accelerator down now, and I don't know how much longer things will go on in Ukraine, but certainly Russia's winning Russia's now finally taken out things like the water supply, the electricity, etc., which they were trying to save. They were trying to do the liberation of the Ukrainians without destroying infrastructure. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians and the deep state and the bank gangsters haven't allowed that. So Ukraine, guys, that war should be over. But again, we can't go forward with Jasara. We can't go forward with anything until these conflicts are sorted. And then the next one, guys, which I'm not sure, it appears that China may need to go into Taiwan and sort out. There's obviously biolabs there. There's all sorts of child trafficking facilities, deep underground military bases, etc., in Taiwan. So at this stage, I think you guys are aware of the fact that there was an attempted coup in China by the CCP, believe it or not, and that was overthrown. And at the moment, the people themselves are standing up in China and they've had enough. So there's still pockets of CCP control in China, which is slowly but surely being defeated and broken down. But that also needs to be sorted out. And another one that I picked up, which I didn't dig really deeply into, but I'm sure it is going to possibly require military intervention, is Israel. Now, Israel, as you know, is a very, very dark place, which, and I say that, and I say that hesitantly, because there's a lot of good people in Israel. The leadership in Israel is dark to the core, and in fact they are deep state. I mean, the whole Israeli independence was designed by the deep state as a means of place where they could have a base, etc. So that was certainly not Israel, guys. Like I said, I'm not sure if there is going to require if it is going to require a military response, but that's another possible place where there might be a requirement for a military intervention. And then finally, what we're going to be looking at is, I just want to sort of ask the question, what else could be delaying things? And we're going to go in and have a look at the possible collective consciousness of humanity, etc. And maybe a tiny deep dive, and just see what we can possibly start doing on a personal level to start raising our own personal consciousness. Because obviously, as our individual consciousness goes up, so does the collective consciousness of humanity. Next thing, guys, is I've invested sort of the past few weeks, guys, to gain inner standing specifically around the following sort of financially. So what else? Like I said to you, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive financially. And so what I was doing was having a look at the financial market. So on that front, guys, I'm very, very comfortable. There are so many countries, way in excess of 120 countries are now asset backing their currencies and requesting membership of BRICS. So that is absolutely brilliant. And I've mentioned these two countries before, but they are so profound. Germany and Japan. Germany, as I said, they were one of the founding members of the G7, which became the G8, and Japan, basically it's a protectorate of the US. So those two countries requesting membership of BRICS is so massive. I just felt I needed to mention them again. And the other thing, which is absolutely monumental, is the bankruptcy of FTX. I think it's the greatest news in the financial markets from our perspective, certainly the worst news for the deep state. But what that basically does is it cuts off one of the biggest financial instruments that the deep state has been using to continue financing all of their ridiculous evil activities all around the world. So that FTX going bankrupt was massive. It's all related to cutting off monies to the Ukraine, so that's going to help Russia to defeat Ukraine a lot quicker. It's also cut off a ridiculous supply of infinite money that was available. It was like for example, the US would send money to Ukraine, and FTX would basically channel that money straight back via their evil mechanism straight back to the Democrat Party in the US. So, guys, it's one of the most amazing pieces of news, and it's cut off a lot. It's cut off a massive amount of money that the Ukraine and the rest of the world, the deep state, the bank gangsters, were using to finance all of these evil activities that we're up to. The other thing that's massive, guys, is BRICS is really close to going public with their reserve currency. It's basically, well, let me just explain what that is. Obviously, there's just been the petrodollar, and all countries in the world were forced to use the petrodollar to buy whatever they wanted to buy, oil or gold or whatever it was. They had to use the petrodollar. The BRICS countries are now building a reserve currency in competition to that. That is so massive already. South Africa, Russia, China, Brazil, etc. They're all saying, if you want any of our resources, in other words, if you want gold, don't pay me with debt, which the petrodollar is just a debt instrument, right? What those countries and an extended amount of countries, like I said, up to 120 countries already, are also saying, guys, we don't want your petrodollar debt-based instrument. We now want real tangible assets. So if you're going to buy our oil, pay us in gold. If you're going to buy our gold, pay us in something tangible. And that is massive, guys. So that is huge. And that is one of the biggest safety nets that's in place, is with those BRICS countries having this asset-backed currencies, it's forcing the whole world to asset-back their currencies. And remember, all asset-backed currencies does away with inflation, stops these ridiculous fluctuations in currency valuations against each other. It is absolutely brilliant and very, very important, guys, as a safety net when all of these financial markets start to collapse. Guys, the other thing was, after doing a really deep dive into the financial markets, guys, I can just say one more time, I am extremely comfortable that almost everything required to act as a safety net is in place. So I'm not going to say 100%, but I'm going to say very, very close. There might be one or two things that still need to happen, but these are small things that can happen very quickly. So the things that I believe still has to happen, but guys, this has to be done in the public domain, is the closure of the criminal internet. So currently the internet is called Mockingbird. So it's a system, guys, that was designed with backdoors by these criminals so that they could do all of the evil, clandestine ugliness without us even knowing about it. So the whole Mockingbird internet has to go, and it needs to be replaced with a new quantum internet, guys, which is going to be called Odin. Now, what that is at the moment with Mockingbird, they can still use cryptocurrencies and things to finance stuff around the world. But once we shut down Mockingbird completely and we switch over to Odin, guys, that is the final nail in the deep state or the bank gangsters or the Khazarian mafia's coffin, is that is going to shut down all of their money, guys. And remember, if they have no money, they can't do all of this evil stuff. So it's been a process. And like I say, from a financial perspective, I am very comfortable that we could pull the trigger tomorrow and everything will be fine. But there's still other things that like I said, I wasn't seeing, and that's what I try to have a look at. So the second thing I looked into was possible mass extinction events, because that's something that the deep state's been doing a lot of, is whenever the white hats or the good guys or the light says, hey, we're going to go ahead and do this, they threaten a nuclear suitcase they're going to blow up in Seattle or whatever the case may be, or they threaten another biological attack, etc. So this has been something that has definitely been delaying things. So guys, as I did a deep dive into this arena, I realized that the white hats are allowing the deep state, guys, to approve these new vaccine passport things, right? Because how do you wake up the absolute sleepers? Guys, I think if you really go back 2 years, there was a mass awakening event. And what was that mass awakening event? It was COVID. So even now, when these vaccine passports are introduced, and unfortunately, I think you guys are going to hate this, but my research seems to indicate that we are probably going to go into another medical lockdown, guys. I really didn't want to share that with you, but it appears so. And it appears that there's going to be vaccine passports are going to become mandatory and vaccines are going to become mandatory. Now, what I see happening there is, just don't stress. It's not bad. It's actually great news, because once that starts to happen, remember, we have to reach a critical mass of enough people with their consciousness elevated sufficiently so that the collective consciousness of humanity is high enough that we can actually shift onto the more optimal timelines. But in order to do that, guys, we need to wake up a critical mass. we haven't woken up that critical mass yet. That's one of the other factors delaying us. So because we haven't woken up that critical mass yet, we're going to unfortunately have to go into this medical lockdown where even those absolute sleepers, and I'm gonna call them even those communists, right? Those communists who allow their children to go to those transvestite parties and are all woke and believe in critical race theory, even those folk are going to freak out, and I think even they are going to wake up. And it's probably going to be the second mass awakening event, which is going to wake up so many people. And once those people wake up, guys, we're going to reach that critical mass, and then things can really start accelerating. Because once we pull the trigger and things start to go public, it's going to be like a snowball rolling down the mountain. It is just going to pick up momentum, and more and more and more is going to happen, guys. It's going to become like an avalanche of revelations, etc., etc. So the other thing that may happen, and I couldn't get enough information. I'm not sure whether this is really hidden, but I really tried to dig, and I couldn't find information on this. But it appears that there may be a nuclear scare as well. So that could come as well. But like I've said to you many times, guys, we can never, ever allow a nuclear weapon to be detonated on this planet again, because it actually tears the fabric of time, and it cannot be allowed. So certainly, guys, expect another medical lockdown, but it's very necessary, guys. It's absolutely crucial to wake up those sleeping masses, because that is going to help us from a collective consciousness perspective reach that critical mass where things can start rolling out, things can start happening. Next, guys, is I looked militarily. So I had a look, and I've discussed some of this already, and there are things. So the war in Ukraine needs to be over. Remember, as far as JASARA, one of the requirements of JASARA is no military can be anywhere but in their own country. So, guys, there is going to be certainly a mass awakening event where the military really is the only way. You know, there's these bank gangsters, deep state, Khazarian mafia have spent a long time. I don't want to scare you with how long, but it's been a very, very long time entrenching themselves in every level of control, from government to education to sciences to the mainstream media. Absolutely every facet of our life. They've entrenched themselves because what have they looked to do? They've looked to control the flow of information. Remember, whoever controls the flow of information controls exactly what choices humanity collectively gets to make. So whatever story, narrative we're told, that directs the choices. And remember, the choices we make is what puts us as a collective consciousness onto a specific timeline. So by them controlling all of the input of the narrative and the media and the story that they've been telling us, guys, it's been forcing us to make bad choices. It's been forcing humanity onto the most optimal timelines for the cabal, or the deep state, the Khazarian mafia, but the least optimal timelines for us. So we need to, like I said, this medical lockdown, whatever you want to call it, guys, we need it. We've got to wake up more of the people. We've got to wake up that critical mass. And I believe that is going to be the event that'll actually finally get all of those sleepers to wake up. All of those sleepers who are refusing to see, guys, because as we all know, there is so much information out there. People who aren't seeing are not. You know, if I think back to maybe 2-3 years ago when I was looking for information, man, you really had to dig. Now, I put in a search and within seconds, I'm finding copious amounts of information. So at this stage, guys, it's no longer a case of the information is too well hidden for people to wake up. No, people are just too damn lazy to bother to take a look because it's all there. So what has to happen? Unfortunately, guys, we've got to scare these people awake, or we've got to anger them awake. In other words, anger them with another medical lockdown. So unfortunately, guys, for us, I don't know how you're going to get through this, because I know some people are already in very, very, very dire positions financially, etc. So I don't know what to say to help, but guys, the great news that I can report is the mainstream media has already started reporting that in the middle of next year, we're going to have public tribunals. Now, that's a great time frame because a hell of a lot needs to happen before the middle of next year for us to actually have these public tribunals. But it does also mean that things might be taking a little bit longer than we expected. And I think if you think back to a year ago, you probably thought, I can't do this for another year. But here we are, a year later, guys, and yeah, so much has happened and things are really moving along at a massive pace. But like I said, this is a trans-dimensional war. There's been a massive amount of misdirects from both sides. I mean, the good guys, the white hats, have obviously put out misdirects because this is a war. You can't give your enemy the right information. So very often, guys, the guys like myself, we've given wrong information. Why? Because it's been misdirects, because it is a war. So this trans-dimensional war, guys, is coming to an end. But it is such a complex war. And there's so many facets to it. It's not just shooting cannons and rockets and stuff, guys. There is a financial element. There's a legal element. There's a legislative element. We got to look at health and medical and the way these monsters have actually created eugenics programs to wipe out humanity. We have had to, as the good guys, slowly but surely change the narrative, because remember, we can't create too much fear, because what does the dark feed on? They feed on our fear. So imagine if we just had an EBS, which all of us are praying is going to happen pretty soon, right? The moment you have that EBS, it's going to cause such massive fear, and it's going to help the bad guys, because the bad guys feed on that fear. It's called loose energy. So we don't want to give them more ammunition. We don't want to give them more energy, guys. And that's why we've got to gradually move people, shift people's consciousness, shift the collective consciousness of humanity more and more positively, so that when we do, if there ever is an EBS, the jury's still out for me on that. I think it might just be too scary for people. But if there ever is an EBS, we've got to be way further down the line than we are right now, guys, because when that EBS happens, or if that EBS happens, it's going to cause so much fear that we're actually playing into the hands of the deep state, of the Khazarian mafia. We've got to avoid pushing people into those lower chakras where fear, etc., lives. We've got to create, over time, start creating a new narrative that is helping people to move into the higher chakras, into the heart chakra, and eventually, guys, into our pineal gland, and finally into the crown chakra, where we can actually see a connection to absolutely everything. So these are all things that need to happen, and it needs to happen gradually so that we don't empower the enemy with fear, etc., guys. So the last thing that I really looked at is I asked the question, so what else could be delaying things? And that's where I got to we need humanity to accept a new narrative, right? What is that new narrative? It's a new narrative which will support us to shift away from fear and anger towards love. And so that is what is gradually being done, is we are revealing. So I'm sure we're all probably sitting here and thinking, wow, things are really getting bad. When in fact, things aren't getting bad, they're just getting revealed. So all of these things would have been happening, and maybe because of the white hats' intervention, they're pushing the deep state, the Khazarian mafia, etc., to take actions faster than they would have. So it kind of, the old adage of, you leave a frog in a boiling or a pot of water and you heat it slowly and the frog will boil to death. Well, one of the things that definitely is happening is they're forcing the deep state to work on an accelerated program, accelerated process, which is, hey, a lot of people are waking up. And that's part of the process. But collectively, guys, we need to shift away from fear. And that is why, like I said, we can't have an EBS. Because what is an EBS going to do? It's going to instill fear into the mass of people. So the mass collective consciousness of humanity is going to move into a place of fear, which is going to push us away. We've gradually been changing the narrative, and we've gradually been shifting onto more positive timelines. The moment we do an EBS, guys, it's going to shift humanity dramatically back onto those negative timelines because of the fear, and through the loose energy, we're going to be feeding these monsters, right? What we ultimately need to do is we need to reach a critical mass of awakened people so that the collective consciousness of humanity is high enough to help us to consistently shift off these very low timelines and gradually, without instilling fear into the mass consciousness of humanity, to gradually shift humanity onto more and more and more positive timelines. And that is happening, guys. Like I said to you, on the financial front, everything's in place. Militarily, I see all we've got left to sort out is Ukraine, possibly Taiwan. Syria certainly needs to be sorted out. I'm not sure about Israel, but I think there may be a military element involved in Israel. So those are the four military elements that need to get sorted out. There certainly is, like I said, unfortunately, it appears from all the research that I've done that there is going to be another medical lockdown. But it's great news, guys. That medical lockdown is being allowed. These passports, these ridiculous vaccine passports, etc., are being allowed to come through to really get people to wake up. Finally, those sleepers, those guys that are so asleep, so under MK mind control, those people, guys, those are the people that we need to move. Because remember, how do they program us with MK ultra mind control? Guys, they use fear, they use anger, they use torture even when they're using it on prisoners, etc., to force us into our lower chakras. Guys, we need to help humanity to move out of those chakras of fear and anger, and we need to help them to move into the heart chakra of love, and we need to help them to move into the crown chakra where we connect and we actually see, guys, we are interconnected. Everybody is connected to everybody. And the future for humanity, guys, like I said, I can't say definitively exactly what dates everything's going to happen. I think there's probably less than 10 beings on this planet that know those things, those dates exactly. But what I can tell you categorically is humanity is moving towards the Great Awakening. Humanity is moving into a place, and I'm going to say 1,000 years of peace, because that's kind of what all the religious texts suggest. But I think we're moving into a place of infinite love, infinite peace, infinite success, infinite abundance, guys, where humanity is going to live. This 120-year life expectancy is basically going to expand as well. So from a health perspective, we're going to live as long as we want to live, guys. There's med beds, there's where they can actually use sonic healing, etc., to reverse ages, etc. So we are headed to a golden age of unbelievable love, peace, and tranquility. When it's going to happen, guys, I can't say definitively, but I can tell you categorically, everything that I see in the environment around us is pointing in that direction. Everything that you would expect to be happening is happening. Sure, it may not be happening at the pace that we'd want it to happen, but remember, guys, this is a transdimensional war that we're fighting. It's so complex. I just take my hat off every day to the amazing, amazing beings that are supporting humanity to beat, to destroy these evil, evil bank gangsters, etc.